Hey there, thanks for turning down my road. If this is your first time here, my name's Carl. My little brother and I both work for local farmers full time, but we both also farm together with our cattle herd and our hay operation. Everybody's involved, from the smallest to the biggest. If you don't have the joy of farming yourself, I'd love to help you experience it through this channel. Whatever your background, you found the right place. This is Dodge Brothers Farm and Ranch. Howdy everybody, welcome back to Planting 2020. Thank you so much for all of your really thoughtful questions and feedback about the last couple planting videos that I put out. Pretty much just using these next few videos to answer as many of your questions as I can and try to explain things out loud and show you things with the camera as much as I can. I'm also trying to keep up with the comment sections on the videos as much as I'm able to as well. I promise I'm gonna do my best to reply to every one of your questions and comments. It's taking me longer than normal, but I hope you forgive me for that. First thing I wanna do today is I wanna get into the iPad because I promised you I would show you how that works. What we are mapping on the iPad is some really cool stuff. To be able to lay that out in a map form and visualize it is really helpful. So we're gonna dive right into that. I'm gonna show you that. If you get bored during this iPad section, I don't know how long it's gonna be. I assume it'll probably take 10 minutes or so to get through it. So I don't think you'll get bored. I think you're gonna love this. I do. I'm excited about it. But if you get bored, just, fast forward maybe 10 minutes to get through the iPad section. All right, let's get into it. Okay, what you're looking at first here is a map of singulation as we're planting. And if you remember, singulation is defined as the percentage of times that we are dropping just one seed when we're supposed to be dropping a seed. You can see over in the left-hand side, it's actually showing our singulation percentage of 99.6. And I can zoom in on the tractor and planter here a little bit. You can see each individual row, and you can see the direction of travel. I just laid down a travel arrow that shows that I'm headed north. And the benefit of that is if you come back to the field later with the iPad and you're walking around, you can actually figure out what row you're looking at because you know which direction the planter was traveling in the spot that you're standing with the iPad. So you can see by the legend that the red dots are places where we're skipping, we're missing dropping a seed, and the blue dots are a place where we're dropping more than one seed. Neither of those are good. I suppose a skip is better than a multiple because at least you're not wasting seed. But then the green spots are obviously where we're doing good, where we're dropping one seed everywhere we're supposed to be. Okay, let me flip to the next map. It'll show your hybrid, which is handy when you switch hybrids in a field. You can see where everything is planted. When I pulled in over on the east side of this field, I had a little bit of the hybrid left from the other farm that I came from, and that's where the orange is. We can look at population. I wanted to plant those two different hybrids at different populations, so that's why we have different populations showing up on the map. Okay, so the downforce is a little bit difficult to understand. I'll try to explain it as best I can. Each row has an individual hydraulic cylinder attached to that row unit with an electronic actuator built into the cylinder, so each row can do different things for down pressure than the next row beside of it, which is really awesome. We used to have airbags on the rows for downforce, and you were limited to the entire planter doing the same thing. So you can actually see that each individual row, if we zoom in, is doing something different with downforce. Some of them, if we look at the legend, scroll down the legend a little bit, when you get past the blue into the pink, that's 0 downforce, and in the purple is actually negative downforce, meaning that that cylinder is actually lifting the row unit a little bit to try to keep from having excessive pressure down on the furrow and on the gauge wheels. Okay, so what I probably should show you first to make this easily understandable is the straight up downforce map. This map is showing ground contact, loss of ground contact, and it's also showing extra weight carried to achieve ground contact. The gauge wheels run next to the disc openers, and that is what sets your depth. So there's a little weigh bar inside the row unit that detects how much extra weight is being carried on those gauge wheels, and that's being displayed right here. In fact, if you look over on the left-hand side, you can see the 100% downforce ground contact and 46 pounds of margin. the 46, 52 pounds of margin right now, that is how much extra weight each set of gauge wheels is carrying to keep that row unit in the ground 100% of the time. So if you look at the map that we're making, it'd be ideal if it could all be green, but the planter cannot react fast enough to keep it all perfectly green. It's doing the best it can. Every spot that there's a little blue dot, that's a place that the disc openers came out of the ground just a little bit. You don't want that because that affects your seed depth. You want to maintain uniform seed depth, and that is critical to having your seeds all emerge at the same time and be at the same stage of growth right at the beginning. That's really important. So we want to keep this map all green and yellow if we can. The orange and red is a little too much downforce, but that's better than having it come out of the ground. Okay, let's go ahead and switch to the other downforce map called applied downforce. So this is actually a measure of what each hydraulic cylinder is having to do to that row unit to achieve uniform ground contact. So this one does not look nearly as homogeneous as the other one. You get a lot of yellow and green in the downforce map. The applied downforce map is going to look very different on each row. And if I zoom out a little bit, you can kind of start to see patterns in the field. Now it's interesting, the purple is actually lift on each row, and the green and yellow is actual down pressure on each row from the hydraulic cylinders. And if you look at the right side of the map being green and the left side of the map being purple, that's where I went home and changed the insecticide boxes. And they each weigh 50 pounds when they're full. So when I went from having empty boxes to having full boxes, I added 50 pounds to each row unit. And so those hydraulic cylinders had to compensate for that by lifting on the rows. So that's why the side of the map that I'm making right now has a lot of lift and the other side had a lot of down pressure. I think that's pretty cool to look at. You can also usually see when you zoom out in fields, you can see patterns from other things that have happened. If you look over at the short rows on this field, you can see a diagonal pattern, and that's actually compaction made by the manure applicator hose. And I don't know if I would say that it's compaction to the point where it's critical and it's affecting drainage or anything, but it's definitely detectable still, even through our thin layer of tillage that we did this spring. The planter is actually reacting to the ground being firmer and softer in between those wheel tracks, and you can see it reacting in real time on that map. You can see where we're going straight and it crosses over those layers where it has to put more down pressure or more lift pressure on each row. And if you flip over and look at the actual downforce map, it's doing a great job of achieving uniformity. You don't really see those patterns in the downforce map, which I think is just a testament. You can see them just a little bit, but that's a testament to what a great job the planter's doing reacting when you look at the applied downforce map. I think that's pretty cool. All right, let's move on. Clean furrow, that is from one row is the only data we're getting because we have one smart firmer attached to this planter, and it's detecting the conditions in the furrow. So, you know, green is good, red is bad, and then there's a spectrum in between. We want to keep all the trash out of the furrow as best we can so that we can have uniform seed to soil contact. Furrow moisture is pretty cool to look at. It's all pretty uniform right here. We're in the mid 40s. Right now I'm running 44%, 42% furrow moisture, so it's not going to change a whole lot. The good ride quality map, red is bad, green is good. This is just a map of basically how smooth or rough the ride was on the row units. Okay, organic matter is kind of cool. This is done by the smart firmer as well, and it's really fun to overlay this map with soil types. And you can kind of see on the soil maps when we compare those to the organic matter map that it definitely makes sense based on what type of soil we have in those areas. When you look at this, the short rows here, if you zoom in here where the organic matter is really low, that's actually an area of the field that is very tough clay. It doesn't have a lot of nice fine topsoil up there, and so it makes sense that the organic matter is down in the lower lying areas around the waterways where the soil is really nice and black. Okay, sweet. Move on to planter speed. This is a really boring map to look at unless you accidentally shift into 10th gear like I did right here. And you can see I was running 3/4 of a mile per hour faster. We can look at planting date, which is kind of handy when you go into a field multiple times due to rain events or whatever. We can look at, we were already looking at the singulation map. We have a soil temperature map here, which is once again only reading off of one row, but it's pretty boring. The temperature, as you can see, was a little cool when I started over here along the east side that morning. It was in the yellow, 40 to 45, and then it got above 50, which is the red on the rest of the map. Spacing. Spacing is very similar to the singulation map. If we get in closer to the planter, the orange dots are moderate errors in spacing, and the red dots are severe errors in spacing. And I've gotten out and dug seeds and checked before, and what I'm defining as a moderate error is what we were looking at on the last video, where you had a seed that maybe was an inch away from where it should have been. The severe errors, you might have a seed be 3 inches away from the next seed instead of 6 inches. So we try to avoid those red spots. A lot of times if you look at the ride quality maps, you'll see that those red spots overlap with a bad spot in the ride quality, and I'm thinking that there might be some rocks just under the surface that bounce the row units just a little bit, and that messes up the spacing as well. Okay, I think we've looked down all the maps. Forgive me if we haven't. I think we have. So if we get out here and we're watching the planter go, another cool thing that we're able to do here is if I click on this graph over on the right hand side, let me get to singulation because that's a really neat one to look at. Click on the graph and I can organize the rows by singulation, and I can see that row number 10 is currently doing the greatest job at singulating, and row number 3 is doing the worst job. And you can look at that by field or overall. And we can also split the screen and look at two different things at once. A lot of times I like to look at singulation on one screen and the downforce map on the other screen to make sure I'm not having a lot of blue spots where it's coming out of the ground. And then, so I think it's cool to watch it when we cross the waterway, and you can just see a visual image of how the planter shuts each row off as we're going through, and then turns each row back on as we're coming out the other side of the waterway. I think that's pretty cool. All right, another thing you can do is you can actually control the hybrid change on the iPad. So if I click on the hybrid right here, it'll take just a second to come up. So there it brings up the hybrids that we've used on the planter on this particular field. Pioneer 622, DeKalb 5553, DeKalb or Cropland 5073, and Channel 20953. And that Cropland 5073 was what was left over from the previous field that we planted. It was just about an acre worth. What you can do when you select the hybrid is you can go in here and select it on all rows or the left half. You can even select it on individual rows, but obviously to get that to happen, you would need to just fill the mini hoppers by hand with different types of seed and shut the blower off so that you didn't get seed coming to the mini hoppers from the central delivery tanks. Okay, so that pretty much does it for the iPad. I hope you guys have enjoyed this little tutorial. It took an entire mile to get it done, or a mile and a quarter, but let's get out of the iPad now. Maybe I'm just a nerd, but I think that is really cool technology to be able to see those things and control those things from the iPad, and then be able to take that iPad right out of the tractor, walk around the field and find problem areas with planting, dig up some seeds and verify the issue. I think that's just really, really cool. It's also pretty cool that we run this iPad in the combine in the fall, so we're mapping all of our yield data and moisture data and stuff onto the same iPad, same program. So then we can overlay all of our harvest data with all of our planting data, and we can find the correlations between planting issues and yield loss and try to learn and do better every year, year after year. We did get rained out for the last couple of days. It gave us time to work on the Landau VT just a little bit. We had some bolts that were breaking on the rolling basket frame, so we were able to get all those replaced. We had just been fixing them one at a time as they broke in the field. But the rain gave us time to drag it back to the shop and replace all 32 of them so that we won't have any more downtime in the field for that issue at least. So that was good. So I got asked a great question about end rows. Do we plant just one planter pass along the end of the field or multiple passes? We plant 2 passes along the end of the field, and let me show you why. I'm coming up on the end of the field right now, and you can see on the iPad that I'm coming into it with 2 passes on the end of the field. Now if you watch the planter and tractor on the iPad, while I turn around, watch this. You will see that the tractor and the planter have to go past that first pass to make the turn. I'm not able to turn around in just 40 feet. I need at least 60 feet to turn around on. So that's why we have to make 2 passes with the planter on the end of the field. Also, I was asked if we plant all of our rows north and south, or if we orient the rows based on the length of the field. If our field is longer to the east and west, do we plant it that way? And that is the correct answer. We try to orient all of our rows so that we are planting in the longest direction possible. The only exception to that rule is farms that have extremely steep slopes and we're afraid of erosion happening on the slopes. We don't plant up and down those slopes. We want to plant across them so that as the corn is planted in rows and the water wants to come running down the side of that slope, it has to cross every row of corn, and that really slows the water down as it goes down the hill. If you planted up and down the hill, you would be creating a bunch of little racetracks for that water to run down the hill, and you'd have major erosion problems. So that's really the only exception to the rule of planting the fields in the longest direction. Another really good question that I recently got was, what happens if you have no GPS, if you lose signal for a long period of time? I've never lost signal for more than just half a minute at a time. That's really annoying, and you got to stop and reset things. If we lost a GPS signal for a longer period of time, we would still be able to plant, because I could use the markers out on the end of the planter to mark my next pass out. If you're not sure how that works, go ahead and look at the last video called Up Close with a Farmer Planting Corn or something like that I posted just a few days ago, and you can see the marker in action striking out a mark for the center of my next pass. So we would still be able to plant without GPS. The waterways would be a little bit of a problem and be a little more tricky because the planter couldn't automatically shut off when I was entering a waterway. So I would have to plant into the waterway just a little bit and then stop and lift the planter up to go to the other side of it. And also our planter control monitor is getting its speed reading from the GPS to tell it how fast to turn the meters for dropping seeds at the correct rate. So I would have to switch that over to radar. We actually have a radar system on all these tractors that points down at the ground and gives you a ground speed indication if you're not using GPS. And it's pretty accurate as well if you get it calibrated. So we would be able to plant just fine if we didn't have GPS. It would be a minor inconvenience, but we could still do it. Obviously, the other issue we would have if we didn't have a GPS signal is we would not be able to make this map of what we're doing with the planter, because the unit would have absolutely no idea where we are located on the earth at any given point, so it wouldn't be able to make a map. That would be a pain. Say hello to all the people, Andrew.
Hi!
Yeah, that's good. So Andrew and I have been having a little trouble with the planter. Row number 12 was failing to plant seed quite often. You can see all the red streaks right there and some of the streaks with data missing on row number 12. It happened a little bit going this way and quite a bit going that way. So one of the best ways to diagnose a planter problem such as this is to start swapping parts from row to row. On a planter like this with electric drives, each row really is its own little planter. And so what we do is we move the meter from one row to the next. So I took off the meter and moved it from row 12 to row 13, switched those two out, and the problem stays on row 12. So the next thing I want to swap out is the seed tube that has a little sensor in the side of it that detects the seed sliding down the tube and counts the seeds and tells you what the spacing is. So I swapped the seed tubes out between row 12 and row 13, and now, frustratingly enough, which I don't know if I should be frustrated or not, but I am, the problem is completely gone away. What you're hoping for is you're hoping to see the problem move from one row to the next, and when you move that piece of equipment and the problem moves with it, then you know that's the faulty piece of equipment. So what we were hoping would happen was that when we moved the seed tube from row 12 to row 13, I was hoping the problem would move to row 13, and then we would know that the seed tube sensor was faulty, and I could just send somebody to the dealership to pick one of those up and we'd be back in business. But the problem seems to have gone away, which it was occasionally going away before on its own. And anytime you have a problem that's intermittent, starting and stopping like that, and there's no pattern to it, it's really hard to diagnose. It gets a lot easier to diagnose once the problem keeps happening and won't go away. Then it's pretty easy to get to the bottom of it. There is one other part that I could swap out. It's called the SRM, stands for single row module, I believe. I have one of those in the tractor here in the storage compartment. That's basically the brain center for each row. Each row has one of those. It has a gyroscope in it so it can detect ride quality if the row's bouncing around a lot. And it's also the distribution center that communicates from the main harness coming from the tractor and the monitor back to that row. So if I still have problems and the issue is still on row 12, I'll probably swap out the SRM and see if that fixes it. That's really the best way to do it on these electronic gizmos, is to just start swapping parts around and see where the problem goes. Man, it finally got really sunny, warm enough to take the sweatshirt off. It feels good. Okay, another good question somebody asked, what is the deal with these gauges on this box back here? I may have mentioned, may have not mentioned before, that this is the clean sweep control. It controls the up pressure and down pressure on the row cleaners. The row cleaners run on the ground along ahead of the row units, and their job is to push the corn stalks and clods and dirt balls and stuff out of the way to kind of get down to a nice smooth seed bed to plant into. That little black unit on the hitch of the planter is an air compressor, and it provides all of the air pressure for the clean sweep row cleaner system. The hose comes from the air compressor up into this control unit, which has a gauge on it for tank pressure, down pressure, and up pressure. I'm actually running a little bit of lift pressure on the row cleaners right now. If I let that pressure out of the lift, then it's going to be running the row cleaners a little harder down on the ground. Basically, if you've got it centered on 0, it's just the weight of the row cleaners holding themselves on the ground. You can put down pressure on it, or you can lift them right up like this and lift them right out of the ground. Well, the sun's starting to go down on another beautiful day of corn planting. It started out just a little sticky, a little tacky this morning, but it's just absolutely perfect conditions right now. Couldn't be any better. Couldn't ask for anything more. I want to say thank you so much for all of your support. Thanks for watching these videos and asking such great questions. I'm doing my best to try to keep up. I'm really busy. I'll do what I can, and I promise I'll try to get to your questions sometime in the next week. Thanks for watching. Thanks for riding along, and I'll see you next time.